Nobody signed up to stare at an electronic health record and type all day long. I don't know who did that. Transcriptionists, those jobs went away years ago. So
Yeah.
literally, I don't think anybody's in your in your office that, gets up in the morning like super psyched. Gosh, I hope I get to type and key stuff into the chart. No, the things that we want to make sure that we're doing give back time, and we're able to do that if we develop or tailor our solutions not for the clinicians but with them, understanding where their pain points are, understanding what the workflows are. Don't go after the things because they're flashy and exciting. Make sure you go into the people who are actually running and executing on a daily basis, whether they're checking in patients, scheduling appointments, the MAs, bringing the patient back to the exam room. What are the things that they need in order to have that be super smooth and allow them to just be present with the patient? That's usually what, if you ask them, those are the things that matter to them. They want it to be doing something that actually stays connected to human beings and is helping them. The people they love that. So one of the things that I would say, if we use the rule, is it going to give time back? We will do well with it. The more times there's data that has to move, the higher the risk is for it not to actually be trustworthy. And there's all kinds of inbound and outbound interfaces going in and out of these systems. There's times
Right.
that things get overwritten that should not be overwritten. You register the patient, for sure you've got their everything's correct, the date of birth, their address, everything. They showed you their card. And then an hour later, you go back in there, it's like, oh my gosh, the data's been changed.
Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Scaling Practice Management, the show where we help practice managers grow smarter, not harder. My name is Jakub Grajcar. I'm the head of marketing at Talkie AI, where we help medical practices stop the phone from ringing off the hook and unburden their front desk team with our AI medical receptionist agents, and we're already helping over 300,000 unique patients every month. My guest today is Chris Hutchins. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jakob. Thanks so much for asking. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much for coming on the show. A couple words about Chris for you, watchers and listeners. Chris spent 25 years building and defending the data systems that run real clinical care, including as Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Lifepoint Health and Northwell Health. He now runs Hutchins Data Strategy Consulting. I believe you call it HDSC, right? For short.
Yes.
Advising health systems and boards on AI governance. Chris also hosts the Signal Room podcast, and congratulations, Chris recently published his book Beneath the Signal, which we'll link to in the show notes, of course. I think I saw it available on Amazon. So yeah, again, congratulations on that. And for today, we're going to be talking about AI strategy for our practice, and we'll see what else besides. But first, Chris, we're going to play the warm-up game. Are you ready for the warm-up game?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, excellent. So the warm-up game has two stages. First, you'll pick three numbers, and then you'll pick one of the categories that you get from the numbers. So please pick three numbers from 1 to 10.
Let's do 3, 1, and 7.
1, 3, and 7. Okay. The categories you picked are, the 1 is music, 3 is place or travel, and 7 is talent. Which one do you want?
Let's start with music first.
Music, okay. So what's your favorite song or a song that you've had on repeat lately?
Ooh, I've been buried in here doing all kinds of writing. I'm trying to think. It's the last one I listened to. I think probably the most recent was "Separate Ways" by Journey. I'm an '80s guy.
Okay, yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic. Have you ever attended any cool concerts? Like, let me just say, so for example, I'm a big metal fan, and I'm super jealous of my friends who managed to see Black Sabbath before Ozzy Osbourne passed
Oh
away,
wow,
right? And I feel
amazing!
like that's one on my list that I'll never live down. And I wonder if you have any of those that you remember in particular.
One that I ended up going to that I would have never imagined would be so amazing was I saw the Rolling Stones on the Steel Wheels tour,
Oh wow.
and I have never seen a production level like those guys put out there. I mean, it was a massive mess. It was the Olympic Stadium up in Montreal, Canada, and everything was so precise. And what was really crazy is they had an opening act was living in living color. The guys that had this
Mhm.
song called "Personality," And the contrast to the production level in the same stadium was like remarkable. I was shocked because, I mean, if you've got the Stones there, man, you scrape up the money and pay their sound people. 'Cause they sounded better than their CDs. I didn't think anybody could do that, but they did, and it was clear that they were playing live. But yeah, amazing experience. Oh, just
Yeah, that sounds
another freebie for people who like some 80s music. I got to see on a tour together like 5 years ago, Bryan Adams and Billy Idol. What was
okay.
shocking to me is that they looked and sounded as good then as they did for the first time I heard them back in the '80s. And Billy Idol, that guy, man, really irritated me. He took off his shirt and still got the washboard abs. I'm like, "Oh, man."
How's that
It's just
possible?
just unfair.
Yeah.
But yeah, their
Yeah.
their vocals were still stellar as could ever be.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. That's so great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm already smiling from ear to ear. I think in terms of oldies, not myself, but my parents went to see Deep Purple. That was just a few years ago, and they said
Wow.
they played so well, and they were first of all they were so loud, that it was really very powerful. Yeah, so I'm glad we got that in common. Lovers of music unite. That's great. We just published an episode earlier today with one of our clients, Dr. Lewis Gilbert, who's a musician. So he also picked the music category. Well, actually, he went for the talent category, but we kind of veered into music from there. But that's the warm up game for you. You never know what's going to happen. And that's why we love
I
it,
love it.
watchers and listeners. Okay, lovely, lovely. Thank you so much for expanding on that. And then the second scaling practice management tradition is that we always start with the same question when we get into the meat and potatoes of it. And we'll do the same today. Chris, what is your number one tip for successfully growing a healthcare practice?
First thing I think is if you're making a pivot like I did, you need to pause and actually take the opportunity to really consider how you are going to market yourself because it's a different mindset when you go from working for an organization and representing them, especially if you're dealing with data and analytics and AI like I'm doing. I'm accustomed to supporting and pushing forward the clinical voices and that are really out there for the mission. Your data guy can't be the face of the company. But as a result of that, it's been challenging for me because I didn't automatically know how to shift my mindset to start to put myself out there as a product. And it was harder to even convey exactly what I bring to the table because I've
Mm,
worked in enterprises. And if you have an enterprise level role, you've got this massive expanse of responsibilities. It could be clinical, operational, financial, research, joint ventures, education. I mean, there's all these different things that a big enterprise has. And it's hard for someone to know what a chief data analytics officer does in that environment. So that the critical thing that I discovered, and frankly, it was because someone had the courage to challenge me and tell me the truth. You have to be clear about who you are and why someone should trust you. It's not about your resume anymore because when people don't know who you are and they're a decision maker, they don't know if they should trust you. And it really doesn't matter what you can put in front of them in terms of your credentials or even examples of work that you've done. You have to be trusted first, which means you have to reveal who you are. And so that's it. Be who you are and let people in on it. Let them know the real you.
okay, okay, interesting. I wonder how that relates to like the actual life of a medical practice, and I guess that also depends on the scale of it, right? Because if it's a single location, two location practice, where probably the
Mhm.
main the owner physician is the face, right?
Right.
Versus when we've got like a dedicated marketing team. So, but that means you've been the face of your business probably for a while now. So, what do you find
Yeah.
worked? This does this connect to your podcast, for example?
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. The podcast is really part of a mission for me, and it, honestly, wasn't even about the growing the business, that and, to some extent, it's not. I mean, it's actually introducing me to a lot of people, which is great, but the idea is we wanna really make sure that the right voices have a platform and they're being heard. Right now, we're at a really critical time as I would say, just still entering this, the AI transformation, and the people who are setting policy and regulations are still the C-suite folks, and very rarely do you have the clinical voices at the table. And I think that's
Mm.
probably the most needed voice to be heard right now. So that's one of the things that I try to focus on in my, not only in the podcast, but in my practice as well, trying to make sure that I'm finding the people who are in a position to really do something amazing in the healthcare space, but perhaps they don't have the right level of support in the organization. So part of what I do is really in the readiness side of space there. So I'm looking at how the organization is positioned, how they're setting their priorities, and the harder part is from a people standpoint. How is your workforce prepared? Are they prepared? And how do you get them ready? And more importantly, when you're talking about the clinical folks that are dealing with the operations, really make sure that you're doing everything that you can to make it easy for them to understand what you're doing with AI, because they're the ones that are going to be really needing that understanding the most. But they also have probably the least amount of time available to learn. So we have to really do
Yeah.
the best we can to make things clearer. So, because they're in healthcare, the relationship that's most important and is most trusted is between the physician and their patient. And so we have to arm both of them with really, really easy to understand information so that they can understand how to use it and how to explain it.
And you know what's the first thing that comes to mind off of what you said is, I wonder if we could take the watchers and listeners a little bit more about like sources of information. Because with AI, I think there's more misinformation than, almost in any other space, right?
Right.
So, before we delve into tips like directly from you, what are some of the sources of information that you would trust versus not trust, in this space?
That is, I really appreciate that question. But first, I would say you want to trust the people who are closest to the work.
Right.
The issues that I see happening are when those conversations happen too late, and we're just pushing technology that we think is going to be the answer. That's really problematic. I stumbled into some things recently. I would have eventually thought about it, I guess, if someone brought it up to me. But AI is designed so that it actually will do everything it can to
Hmm.
answer the question or to give you a solution if that's what you're asking for. And if you don't understand its tendencies, you might actually end up with some bad information that you don't intend to end up with. I'll explain what I mean by that. If you're looking at operations in finance, two different operations, two different experts, they both know their domain very well. They know that there's a hard deck that they do not go past in terms of information that they would disclose into an AI tool. And the reason for that is that you don't want things to be identifiable, right? PHI or PII. What is not necessarily clear is to when the finance person and the operations person both manage that way, and they're putting data into the environment, they may not understand that there are things that actually can connect the dots between those two sets of data. And if they don't know that, the unintended consequence is there's identifiable data that actually comes through the model. And the only reason that would happen is because AI is designed to try to solve the problem for you. And so if it deems that a merge gives you a more robust data set for a purpose that you're trying to fulfill, it will actually just push through that. You might not even notice it. So it's really important to know that it has intent and it's been designed to have it. The trust piece, though, really comes to make sure that you have to have a really good working relationship with the people in the different areas that you're working with if you're going to be deploying the AI. And you have to have the the eyes on that gap in between. Somebody has to have that. And, if you're doing this as in a consulting type of a role, you want to try to find out who those people are. And the answer may be that there isn't somebody that does that. But more
Yeah.
often than not, there's probably one or two. My guess is they might be in the finance area. That's typically where I find people that really understand the relationships between the different data types because the stakes are so high for them to have defendable answers.
Definitely, definitely. And the stakes are definitely high in healthcare too. You're speaking to something that we know intimately here at Talk AI. And that's why we say, because sometimes we have those conversations with practices where they say, okay, why shouldn't I just build my own front desk AI? And one of the main reasons is you really have to be very, very careful about the guardrails that you put around the AI. We put a lot of thought into, creating like a network of sub agents, right? Each with a
Right.
very specialized task to minimize or to remove this risk of going beyond what's in that quote
Yeah.
unquote job description, right? And
Yeah.
affecting data that shouldn't be affected, right? So for example, just one subroutine or sub agent could be just about finding the right slot on the calendar to put a
Mhm.
patient visit into, right? But it doesn't go
Yes.
beyond that, and it doesn't get into this prolonged chain of thinking that makes it go kind of off the rails. But you have to have that
Right.
expertise or a trusted expert to work with to actually
Right.
get there. Yeah. So
Brilliant
just wanted
point.
to add that on. Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. So, quick checkpoint before we move on because there's a lot to dive into here. But for just now, I was wondering if you could tell the watchers and listeners a little bit more about you. So you spent 25 years inside some of the biggest health systems in the country. You were building and governing the data and AI that they run on, and now you help practices and systems get AI right. So could you explain in simple terms, like for a practice manager, they mostly hear the AI hype, right? So how do you explain what you actually do?
This probably won't come as a surprise to anyone, but the data is really the most critical thing when it comes to using AI. And if you're in a practice at this point in your career, you know that there's a lot of challenges around the data quality, whether you can trust it or not. Particularly when an organization is growing, the growth pattern typically is not just organic; there's acquisition that goes on, and when that happens, you're introducing another set of systems that they might be the same ones you're using, but they're not configured the same way. There are implementation choices that get made during an implementation, right? Those things cause the data and the workflows to actually be different, and there are options that are presented by design when someone designs a system. So the compounding effects of adding more and more systems and not actually migrating to a standard, that really causes a lot of mess when it comes to the data, and it's a challenge. If your organization's larger, you might have an in-house team that's really focused on dealing with the data cleansing and modeling. But oftentimes organizations don't have that kind of resource available to them, which really is a pain
Mm,
point for people that are out in the front line and they're checking in patients. Well, there's errors that happen all the time. It's not because someone's or didn't know how to do it. It's more likely than not that there's an integration issue somewhere, or just lack of
mm,
integration completely. But those are the types of things that I've had to focus on over the course of my career, trying to eliminate as many redundant handoffs as I can. There's I could talk for hours on that issue there because the the more times there's data that has to move, the higher the risk is for it not to actually be trustworthy. And there's all kinds of inbound and outbound interfaces going in and out of these systems. There's times
right.
that things get overwritten that should not be overwritten. You register the patient, you know for sure you've got their everything's correct, the date of birth, their address, everything's. They showed you their card, and then an hour later you go back in there. It's like, oh my gosh, that the data's been changed. These interfaces.
Well,
And there's no one that has understood how to put the barriers around data provenance, which is the system of record and which ones need to be
yeah.
downstream of that record. That's a great example of the kind of thing I have to look at, and I spend a lot of time. That's governance in an operational manner.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you touch upon that. Well, first of all, when it comes to these interfaces, a very silly example comes to my mind, but I'm gonna say it, and you tell me if this is at least a similar kind of problem, but in microcosm. So
Uh-huh.
some time ago, I was moving the contacts from my phone. I had them saved on like my SIM card, very very old way of keeping the contacts, and then I moved them into like my phone. I think they were like synced to the Google Cloud or something. And
Yeah.
that's when you were talking about the data changing along the way. When I did that import, or export, however you want to call it, the all the names got garbled. The last name showed up before the first name. It was kind of
Yeah.
truncated with like a semicolon in the middle. So what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that kind of trouble can also happen with data in your system of your practice.
It's 100% correct. And
Huh.
it's one of the things that was always really I would be bracing myself when I heard that we had acquired another organization because I knew that there was going to be a very painful exercise to go through to get everything really mapped properly. Data profiling is not something that people tend to talk about a lot unless they're really doing DBA work They're like an implementation specialist, but even there, it's just not a concept that you typically hear talked about a lot. But it can be a really tedious exercise. That there's nuance,
Yes.
just well, they mentioned addresses. Do you say you spell it out street or do you abbreviate it? ST, a period or no
Hmm.
period, right? Those types of things can really be a gotcha if you don't have people doing the data profiling before you start to like run a backload to get a patient uh, population into a common record. But those things happen pretty frequently. That's why I think some of the big consulting firms have these teams that are primarily focused on doing these type of migrations and and merging systems because it's such a gargantuan effort when you're
Yeah.
dealing with organizations to have any size at all. But even if they're not, you can have a three physician practice and have problems going through that process for the same reasons. It's not one of the more sexy parts of dealing with data and analytics.
Definitely. Yeah, there's always a little bit of upkeep, maintenance, and hygiene in those kinds of things. And that brings me to my next question, because I wonder, in terms of keeping your data in the right place, or keeping it well organized. Imagine if you were to walk into, like you mentioned, this three physician practice, for example, right? And we
Yeah,
want to help them introduce like good data hygiene in their practice, even with, they probably haven't acquired anyone or anything like that, but they still have their
yeah,
own data, the scheduling data, billing data, data on no-shows, referrals,
right.
cancellations, and all that stuff. So what would be the first, what would be the kind of the checklist to go through for them to make sure that they're in a good place with this?
This probably, I don't know if this would be popular or not, but one of the most common errors that I see is customizing your time slots in
Hmm.
your visit types. And what I mean by that is if we all have a 30-minute slot, we have a 45-minute one, we have an hour one sometimes, whatever the time intervals are, those things really need to be standard and kept clean. And understand that what makes it unique to you isn't the visit type and what you call it. It's the combination of the visit type and you as the physician who's scheduling. Uh, this is really for. I've seen really, really hard, ugly messes to clean up just in that space alone when I've tried to get a practice ready to start using some automation that really is able to help them understand and predict their no-show rates. It can give them a heads up. Hey, next week you've only got 5 new patient appointment slots, but you got 7 people. Why don't you move a couple back this week because you got time. I can't
Hmm.
really do that if I don't have a really clean looking visit type that's standard across the whole practice. That's just a really simple one, but those are the types of things that can be problematic. One of the things that's been a barrier the most because you can't really help somebody to optimize their schedule slots unless that stuff is clean enough that you can have line of sight to it, and you don't need to go and sit with the scheduler and actually interrogate them to try to dial it in after the fact. It's much, much simpler because we can be a better support from a system and administrative side of things if we don't actually have to go to school to, to figure out how on earth you built your scheduling templates.
Yeah, yeah. This is very relatable again, because this is exactly the kind of complexity that we unpack with our clients. We're very close to the scheduling, of course, right? We need to know the types of visits and what are the constraints around the types of visits. And sometimes there's so much nuance here where, it's never been written down by anyone, but the front desk team just knows because Dr. Smith mentioned to them, that no new patients on Tuesdays, for example, because, I might not be available on Tuesdays or anything like that, right? And you have to actually get that documented and get that down and explicit in your system, because if not, then any automation you introduce does not see that information, just, period, right?
100%. And that's the criticality of what you're just talking about is actually real because very few organizations that I've been around have actually got the seasonality piece of things baked into their scheduling. What I mean by
Mm,
that, if you are dealing with flu season, should you have a different ratio of sick visits to established visits? I think you should. More often than not, that capability is in the platforms, but it's not being taken advantage of. So basically, the same template, unless somebody's going on vacation, it tends to stay static around the clock.
Right.
In areas where these things are seasonal, you really don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you can adapt them for the season. And when you do that, that actually helps you from a lot of different angles. But probably the more important one, it reduces the level of frustration for the patient, because the patient that's having an established visit is right there, and they're sitting and waiting for their appointment. And you all of a sudden have a sick visit come in, and you know you have to take care of it right away. That's where things start to get frustrating. And someone's in the waiting room wondering why you don't respect their time. It's not really the issue. The issue isn't about the time. It's really about making sure that you've got your scheduling templates designed in a way that you have the flexibility and you can make those adjustments when you need to make them based on the season that you're in.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because we started with a data problem, and then, down the line, if you don't address it, it becomes a straight up patient experience problem, and it can lead to negative reviews. So that, I think, builds the case of why it's so important to actually take a look at that. And that's why I wanted to come back to this data checklist for a second. Do you think there's more we could add there? Looking at the data at the practice, we talked about these time slots and visit types. What would be another popular or probable culprit here?
This one, I think, is probably a little bit more around how we're capturing information, and it's how I would put it into a checklist. But I think the one thing that I would look at is how often are you actually dealing with scheduling a follow-up while the patient's still in your practice? Uh, because some of the things that happen, it's happened to me numerous times. And I'll tell you, bad story, I'll tell you a really good one. So as a patient, I go to my primary care doctor, and you would, go through the normal things. Oh, you probably should have an eye exam. Yeah, maybe we'll bring you back in like 3 months because I'm just concerned about your cholesterol or whatever. I walk out the door. I may or may not be handed a card to call somebody, or a form to fill out or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's on me. I'm like, gosh, I don't remember who the doctor was. And then now I'm like, yeah, well, it's been a couple of weeks. I'm feeling better. I'm not going to do it. That happens. Good experience for me. I had one of those kind of conversations with my physician, and I stopped at the front desk. They said, we'll take care of scheduling for you. We'll reach out. Within a couple of days, literally, I was sitting in an airplane on a taxiway. My phone rang, and it was the doctor's
Hmm.
office. And when I picked it up, they said, "Mr. Hutchins, we have 3 other people on the line. They're from these doctors' offices. We want to coordinate your time. If you could come in we can coordinate on the same day for you. We'd like to do that." I was on the phone for maybe 3 minutes. All of those appointments got set up right then and there. I was
Right.
blown away by that. That's a great patient experience, and it's some of the things that we need to understand for that are really basic. If you're working for an endocrinologist, typically, if you have a diabetic patient, they're gonna need to be seen at least twice a year if things are really well controlled. If they're not well controlled, they should be seen at least 4 times a year. Your front desk staff should always know that, and from a best practice standpoint, one of the coolest things I saw on the inside of the door, going back into the exam rooms, when I come back out, there's a really simple sign on the door. Patients need to stop and see the receptionist, the front desk, before you leave. You turn the
Hmm.
corner, "Mr. Hutchins, does he want to see you in 3 or 6 months?" The appointment's done right then and there. Those are some really basic things. That's the
Yeah.
human part of the checklist that you gotta make sure you do. That capability that knows these protocols, it's actually in some of the systems, not all of them, but some of them do have it. It's just something that's not really leveraged the way it could be, and it does really 2 things. First, you're not losing the opportunity to make sure the patient's still on track and getting the treatment that they need, but you're also not putting the burden of remembering the schedule on the patient. And probably the best part of it is having this personalization going on because they understand who you are and what you need. and they know that
Yeah.
these are the things that are really important for someone that has your condition. If you have the
Yeah.
best outcomes, we're going to help make sure that you are well informed about what we need for you to do and what is going to help you be successful.
And you know what the bottleneck often is for these kinds of things is honestly the capacity of the front desk sometimes, which,
Yeah,
because you mentioned this is the human element. I would say some of the things that we're cooking up here at Talkie, some of that would be taken over by an AI agent, especially,
sure.
the calling the patient to schedule the follow-up visit, or like remind them about those, or remind them of upcoming visits, some of that just to help out, to create a consistency that you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? That's part of what we're involved in as well.
Just to follow up on that one, the interesting piece of it is that I've heard this said countless times. It's like, well, we don't have the same scheduling system as the radiologist or the lab person or whatever. I totally understand that, but that's not a reason that you can't actually put some things in place from a protocol standpoint that actually help to take care of it. Because I don't need you to have access to my schedule to know that um, I just saw a patient that has type 2 diabetes. I have to see them in 3 months, or I have to see them in
Mhm.
6 months. You can do that. That's just something you can put into place as an operational model, even if your
Right.
system doesn't have visibility into these other things. Make sure you have some things in place like that. It's hard because you can't like just pound things together and all of a sudden have interoperability between systems that don't talk to each other. That's unfortunate, but not everything is an integration problem. A lot of times it's a really basic structural thing that you can put in place. Just a procedure, really basic. Doesn't need a computer, just somebody who understands. I'm in a surgical practice. Here are the top 5 things that I know a patient needs who's coming through with a fracture or whatever the thing
Uh-huh.
is, right? It's those are basics. We can't lean on the systems and blame the lack of them or the interoperability for some things that really aren't a technical problem at all.
Very interesting. So what was I meaning to? Yes. So from here, I would love to get back closer to the AI thread. And what I was meaning to ask you, because this is interesting, the day when we talked about recording this episode and set the time, that was the same day I spoke with Sol Marquez. The conversation was primarily about marketing, but on a higher level, it was all about strategy. And for a moment, we talked about AI strategy. And I said on that episode, that one is live right now, for those who want to check it out, that's something that I would love to dive into on a future episode of Scale and Practice Management. And then a couple hours later, I met you on that first call, and now we can speak. So definitely, I want to talk about that. Of course, there's the issue of scale, and I do wonder again. Let's come back to that three physician practice. You tell them that they should have an AI strategy in place. You're probably going to have a couple of weird looks, like us, at this sort of stage,
Yeah,
at this sort of scale. How would you
right.
respond to that? Like, what's the shape of an AI strategy for an independent practice like that?
I think the first thing is, yes, you do need to think about it. And the reason why I'm sure people realize this is in the last several months, patients are using it. They have now been introduced to it. If they're using it even casually using AI, that they're starting to recognize that there's things that are valuable and that are useful to them. So when Anthropic and OpenAI kind of jumped into the the healthcare space when it comes to the use of the generative AI stuff. Patients are able to do a lot of inquiry and I don't like to say it out loud, but self-diagnosis. It's really not self-diagnosis, but they trust, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're dealing with technology. I use the example of like after the first few times I used the Waze app for navigation, I didn't think about it anymore. I trust it. Then all of a sudden I'm driving in Manhattan. If you've ever done that, you'll know this is true. I'm trying to use the GPS, and it's telling me to turn about 3 blocks past where I should have because
Okay.
you're so compact. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it's directionally correct, but nearly impossible to do because you're in a
Okay.
traffic
Yeah.
jam. But that's the kind of thing that we need to take into account is like the technology is brand new. We're still learning how to use it. We have to question it. And
Mm.
what we want to make sure that we do from a strategic standpoint is understand it, first of all. What is it that it does? The real just basics. I'm not talking about going to get a PhD in, you know, artificial intelligence, but just at a real basic level. And if you're not playing around with it on your own, then just do some simple stuff. Just play around it. Just learn kind of how you can use it in a way that's useful to you, and the things that it's just not good at. There's
Yeah.
plenty on both sides of that. But the strategic piece of it is really more so because you want to be able to support the patients. And they're going to use it whether you decide to use it or not.
Mhm.
And when they're bringing something to you, you have to have an understanding that how the information that they're bringing to you actually was derived. And
Right.
as if you're a physician, you know that because you see me as a patient on a regular basis, you can actually read me a little bit. And if you're asking me questions because I'm there for, trying to get some help for a particular issue I'm having, you'll know by my facial expressions if I'm really telling you the whole story.
Right.
AI
Right.
can't do that. AI is not gonna read body language. AI is
Mhm.
also not gonna ask the patient what meds they just took when they're saying, "I've got pain." So the context is missing in that exchange unless the person is a physician, and even then I wouldn't trust it. But if when they're interacting, they don't have an understanding of what you do as a clinician, meaning that they don't know if it's relevant that they took an aspirin
Yeah.
an hour ago. They said, "Well, why would they even put that in there if they don't connect the dots?" You have an
Yeah.
understanding of what's relevant and what's needed to actually go through the process and identify the or proper treatment for them. AI does not have that. It's got the frameworks, all kinds of generic things, but it's depending still on somebody giving it true, valid information that's useful for clinical decision making. Patients typically do not have a full understanding of what those things are. And the models are not going to ask the questions. But
Yeah.
these are probably the most important ones from my standpoint, just right up front, because it's the interaction between the doctor and the patient. That's where you want to make sure that you have an understanding and you can support them. So you don't need to have an expert, like I said, you don't need a PhD in it. Just understand how they're interacting with it and how you can actually play around with it yourself, just so that you have a familiarity enough that you can speak to them. It builds relationship and trust. It keeps that in the
Yeah.
relationship between the patient and their physician's office.
There's a lot of that I agree with. I think, hands-on experience with AI as a doctor is important, right? I know doctors are typically very busy, might not think that it's top priority for them to play around with ChatGPT or Claude, but I
Right.
do think just one or two conversations where they pretend they're a patient, punch in their symptoms, and find out what comes out the other end is really, really
Absolutely.
important. And then again, I think one of the most dangerous things that could happen here, a specific example is some people use AI in a way that they have these long conversations about certain things, right? So I go to the climbing gym, for example. I have one conversation where every time I go to the climbing gym, I tell Claude about it. I get some words of encouragement. That's the risk is minimal there, right?
Right.
But if it's about your health and
Yes.
you have one conversation when you have the flu, another conversation when you have a cold, another when you have some indigestion, and all the context gets mixed up, the
That's
AI
right.
doesn't know what's recent, what happened a day ago, what happened 2 weeks ago, and it can mix things up if those guardrails aren't in place, if there isn't like some compartmentalization of this conversation, and I think
That's
doctors
right.
need to be aware of that, right? So I do wonder if this guides us towards a more general conversation of okay, so what are the most basic elements of how AI works? What are the most important things to know in terms of what it's good at, what it's not good at. As I mentioned, this context kind of decaying or getting mixed up over time. That's one thing I would point out. Long conversations. That's
Right.
if you spend some time in prompt
Right.
engineering, that's one of the rules, right? But what else would you point to that the practices or physicians probably aren't aware of?
This is just kind of probing down just a little bit deeper into what we're just talking about. These tools are when you're using them, they expect and assume you're giving them everything that they need to know to actually answer your question or to give you a solution for. It's just by design. I guess you wouldn't want to design it to try to prevent you from achieving something, but that's an important thing to know. If you've never actually pushed it to challenge you, you should start playing. You should start trying to do that. And here's why: it will absolutely go and make something up if that needs to. I've used it to just, help me to access my own writings, for example, and I'll ask it to go find me an example that I've got in something I've written a long time ago. And if it doesn't find something, oftentimes it'll bring back something to illustrate a point that I never asked it to illustrate. Those types of things are really, really the type of things that come up that make you realize, you know what? I'm leaning on it too much. And it's just a really, really core principle. It is not going to challenge you when you're giving it information and presenting it. It's fact. One of the things I like to do is when I put things in there, I ask it to fact check and go bring me the link so I can read it myself when I do it. Doing that seems to more often than not, address any loose ends in terms of maybe some fabrications, we'll call it, lies, misrepresentations, whatever you call it. But those things it happens again because it's been trained to go and find answers and solutions that you're asking it to do. So one of the things I like to do is just ask it like, tell me why I'm wrong. And it'll go and do a whole nother exercise. And it's good to iterate through it. Don't take the first thing that it tells you. Challenge it. I mean, just
Yeah.
get really, really down to almost adversarial in terms of how you're challenging it, because you really want to make sure you're getting the perspectives all across the entire issue. If you don't do that yourself, the models aren't going to do it for you, but you can get
Yeah.
them to do it, and you'll end up with a different kind of output than I think you probably be much more comfortable with it that it actually is kind of crossed off some things that in your mind were a risk when you started, but prove that they're not a risk. And that's one of the things I like to do with it.
Yeah, I think there's a level of intellectual rigor that you should have when interfacing with AI because it seems like such a convenient, almost magical technology, right? And of
Yeah.
course, I would be pro AI. I work at an AI company. There's a ton of very valid use cases for it, right? But
Yep.
if you're using it, for your own personal use, what I would say is it kind of brings me back to the way certain people Google things, even
Yeah.
pre-AI. Let's say, somebody's looking up information about intermittent fasting, for example. There's a bunch of ways you can search for it. You can say intermittent fasting is good and why, and it's already it's a foregone conclusion then, and it's only going to show you links that show the positives. But it's
Right.
much more, useful intellectually to say pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of it. And I think with AI, this applies, tenfold more. And you actually have to push it because it will try to kind of please you and to see the world the way you see it, even if it's a false way of seeing the world. So it's very important, as you mentioned, I'm just
Yeah.
echoing your point here, really, to push it to say, if I'm wrong, find the information that disproves this, or,
Right.
challenge my claims. A lot of people don't do that, and they should. And
Yeah.
especially with health, this can have consequences, a lot of
Yeah.
consequences. So I,
Sure.
I agree.
You mentioned Google, and it just reminds me. I think back to the very first time I realized it was trying to finish my sentences, like, and I thought
Yeah.
that was like super advanced. Like, how is it doing this? It just this. I heard a comedian one time talk about that. That very thing. Said he was trying to book a flight. He said, and then he spent the better part of an afternoon being an accidental ornithologist because it started to talk about the different kinds of birds that take flight. He said, did you know that there was such a kind of bird as a nearly flightless bird? How about this
Really?
one?
Okay.
Nearly flightless, flightful.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. But it was just funny that, when you said that, it just kind of reminded me because these things have been in place for a long time, and they're just in the background of life right now because we trust them. They're just part
Yeah.
of it. I Google stuff all the time. I'm hoping that it's true, but it's even
Yeah.
more risky now because it's got a whole bunch more material that's out there. I've heard recently over 50% of what you find on the internet right now is AI generated. So maybe you might want to put a little bit more rigor around how you're doing your searches now too for the same reason.
I almost feel like we should provide a counterbalance at this point because we went in the direction of okay, there's definitely risks and there's definitely ways to be skeptical of certain uses of AI. We talked about like the self-diagnosis issue,
Yeah.
and I suppose that that connects with maybe more an AI policy even than an AI strategy, and just
Yeah.
awareness of AI. Okay, so we talked about the dark side. So why are we here still? Building AI solutions, helping companies implement that. On our end, helping companies introduce AI receptionists. Why is it still worthwhile to go
Yeah.
that way?
This is the one that makes me happy. I love to
Huh,
talk about
okay.
this. Here's really the thing that is so exciting to me. If we design things to solve problems that people are really dealing with, that's the only reason to really do it. We want to use that to where it's going to actually help human beings. And I'm very, very passionate about people who are in a position who are taking care of people.
Right.
A nurse, an MA, anybody who's in a practice that's interacting with a patient. Nobody signed up to stare at an electronic health record and type all day long. I don't know who did that. Transcriptionists, those jobs went away years ago. So
Yeah.
literally, I don't think anybody's in your in your office that gets up in the morning like super psyched. Gosh, I hope I get to type and key stuff into the chart. No, the things that we want to make sure that we're doing give back time, and we're able to do that if we develop or tailor our solutions not for the clinicians but with them, understanding where their pain points are, understanding what the workflows are. Because even if the electronic health record is the same in every office, your person who's running your operation, whether it's the physician or someone that they've hired, they have a preference regarding how the workflows should happen. And that's perfectly fine. But if you don't know that and you don't actually get some inputs from them, you can actually design workflows that are disruptive and do have the
Yeah.
opposite effect. It's not giving back time, it's becoming more of a burden. One of the alarms that you should look for at the nurse's station or walk by it, and you see there's sticky notes all over the computer screen on the perimeter. You've got a workflow problem that you probably could fix. More importantly, you should fix. That means we've put some things in place that are not working for them. It's becoming a little bit more disruptive. But the other parts that for me are really super exciting is anything that's rules based. There's a lot that
Mhm.
is. We should be targeting those things to figure out what levers do we have to pull. I mean, there could be some integration things that have to be addressed. Then usually there's some of that. But look at the pain points they have. Ask those questions first. I have been around healthcare forever, and people like me who like technology, we get excited to solve a problem. I do a fist pump if I can make something work that wasn't working before. Don't go after the things because they're flashy and exciting. Make sure you go into the people who are actually running and executing on a daily basis, whether they're checking in patients, scheduling appointments, the MAs, bringing the patient back to the exam room. What are the things that they need in order to have that be super smooth and allow them to just be present with the patient? That's usually what, if you ask them, those are the things that matter to them. They want it to be doing something that actually stays connected to human beings and is helping them. The people they love that. So one of the things that I would say, if we use the rule, is it going to give time back? We will do well with it. And it opens up a lot of other avenues as well, because then all of a sudden the downstream things that have to be in place start actually flowing like they're supposed to. And you've got really good data that becomes available, and it's a shorter distance to travel to become useful for other really important things like research. We're not going to be able to deal with scale with the proliferation of data that we've been seeing in the last few decades. About 5, 6 years ago, I think the number was once every 24 months, all of the data in recorded history doubles.
Uh,
I don't know what that number is. I should probably look it up, but I know it's not 2 years anymore. I mean,
yeah.
it's crazy how fast the data sets and data size are exploding. So if we do these things right, research could be on a whole nother level because there's now all the if you think about they have national registries for certain conditions, for example, the tumor board or things like that. Conceptually, those types of things, if we do this right and we can actually put de-identified data in a research platform that's clean and consistent because we've taken care of all these things and the workflows are cleaned up, we could discover causes and cures to countless types of conditions. But one of the barriers, I was working on a project with a dermatologist when I was in New York. He was really excited when we put in a platform that gave him access to a de-identified data set nationwide. because he had been trying to research a very, very rare uh, skin condition, and he
Mm-hmm.
could not get enough of a corpus to actually have any finding be statistically significant enough that he could even
Right.
get a white paper reviewed for it. But all of a sudden, he sees the whole national database, and oh my gosh, he's got a really, really good set of data that he can lean on, and he can actually push forward the research and actually work on finding cures with other clinicians that are treating the same disease. So that's just one example, but I'll just say when you saw the pace that the COVID vaccines came out, there were a lot of barriers that got removed, and fortunately, there was a mandate. You gotta just open things up and share the data because there was no understanding, not, with no understanding with depth exactly what we were dealing with. Remember, when it came on the scene, it could have been flu, could have been any kind of respiratory disorder, but we didn't know all the specific markers that we needed to be looking at. As soon as we started to understand those, the researchers in the pharmaceutical industry, they went bonkers day and night, and they found treatments that actually made a difference. Imagine that across the whole array of clinical problems
Yeah.
that people their
Yeah.
potential is just limitless.
I think that brings us full circle, right? I think what we're landing on is that AI is really, really useful when it's got concrete data to work on, concrete,
Right.
clean, right? As we mentioned, which is why this data hygiene is so important. And then
Yeah.
once you have that, once you have a source of actual, truth that AI can then analyze, categorize, etc., that can be really, really useful. So, and yeah, and I wanted to just double underline what you said is about AI is just asking yourself the question of, is it gonna give time back? Because sometimes
Mhm.
AI just moves the work, right? And it should
Yeah.
remove the work. This is, I'm not coining the phrase, I heard it on LinkedIn. I'll be honest about it, okay? But it's definitely a sentiment that I agree with. And that's where we would land for right now. I unfortunately we have a moment for just a couple questions left here, Chris. So I guess the main one would be, within this area, what kind of message would you like to leave the watchers and listeners with? We talked, the potential of AI, dark side of AI. We talked about data. We talked about the AI strategy. What do you think is the one most important takeaway to leave our listeners with?
I'm gonna borrow this from a physician friend of mine. What makes AI valuable? It's the person using it, the person who has empathy, understands human behavior, actually cares about people, can reason, has good judgment. You are the most valuable part when it comes to whether AI is going to be successful or not. You're the one. If you're using it, you're the one that has the power. AI is it's useless without you. Let me just put it that way. So if I give you one parting thing, you are what's going to make AI valuable and successful. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to take care of our intelligence as well and apply it when we use AI and don't switch it
Right.
off. And that's that's the last thing I'll say in this episode. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. As the last thing, could you tell the watchers and listeners where to find you and follow you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, and also at HutchinsDataStrategy.com. Or if you want to see the podcast, that's at signalroompodcast.com. But
Mm.
any one of those stops gadget will actually give you a look into the lay ecosystem, so you can look at the resources. And I'll say this has been a lot of opportunities that I've had that are well documented. It's some of the content that I have out there from extraordinary people that have taught me a lot in my career. I'd be remiss to not tell you that there's a lot of depth that people have provided, that have stepped up, that are making a really big difference in their own communities and what they're doing. And fortunately for me, I've had the opportunity to capture some of that information and put it out there for people to actually be able to benefit from it.
Yeah, that's similar to how I feel about this podcast as well. A lot of depth, a lot of various takes on a lot of aspects of the healthcare system, and I'm really grateful to be able to run such conversations as this one today. So thank you again, Chris, for joining us here on the show, and thank you, watchers and listeners, for joining us here today. Don't forget to follow and subscribe, leave a comment, rate us, and all that good stuff on the podcast platforms and on YouTube to help us grow. But for today, this has been Scaling Practice Management. I have been Jakub Grajcar, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, everyone. See ya.